my teeth are painful, my ancillary edge was broken, and I don't know why, but now it's like the fifth time that I have a small piece which is broken, and my dentist is always making reparation, but it's still not working. Why? And it's important to let the patient understand. So for having a very good awareness from your patient, you need to be clear. You need to explain in a very easy way. Okay, the last 10 years, even if you had a very severe, or let's say a one dentition process, you still had at that time enamel. That's why the destruction was very slow. Now, since you don't have any more enamel in some area, you can visualize, you can see that the period of destruction, the episode of destruction start to become more and more frequent. It's not because of lack of chance. It's just because of science. This is fact. And you need to let people understand. You need to show them with a mirror. Look, this is like this in the mirror. Because this part, most of the patients, they don't see it. They don't visualize it. So when you explain that you don't have any more enamel, then they are shocked by what they see in the palatal part. And at the same time, if you explain that when they don't have enamel, then the destruction, the speed of the destruction will be multiplied by 10, they can understand why the dynamic of the disease accelerated a lot the last 1 year or the last 2 years. So as a dentist, we have a lot of challenge. And probably the main challenge is to be able, in a repeatable way, to let the patient move from an initial situation to the final situation, but following a protocol, a repeatable protocol. And if I have to be honest with you, I assume that as a dentist, the very tricky part is to find the way between the before and the between step. Because between the middle part, between step, and the after, it's a matter of, let's say, basic dentistry, cementation, bonding protocol. But in the first step, between the first picture and the second picture, it's a matter of architecture. Where I want to improve the volume, how much I want to increase the vertical dimension. Should I increase the vertical dimension? Why the incisal edge has to be lengthened by 1, by 2, by 3? Why we have to modify or not the lateral corridor? This is really architecture. That's why you need to think in both sides. One will be to think as an architect, and we will explain it deeply later on. And second, you have to think as a dentist. And that's crucial because, unfortunately, in many cases, a lot of colleagues, they jump directly in the case. I have to make a crown. I have to make implant. I have to make composite. I have to do I don't know what. And at the end of the day, we miss the main point. First, making a diagnosis of the wound dentition. Is it abrasion, erosion, or is it both? Second, where do I need to reconstruct some volume? And then you have to make a synthesis between what I want aesthetically speaking and what I need in terms of function to allow the aesthetic design exist. To let the smile exist, you need to create the functional condition. And that's probably, I think, the key point for all of you, especially for the young dentist, because it's quite a little bit more complex topic. So the question to proceed is about, can I use, and let's say this is really close to the DNA of the style Italiano philosophy, whatever is the topic, for composite, for direct and indirect, it's not a problem. It's all about proposing to the community a feasible, teachable, and repeatable approach. And this is really the aim of the full mock-up concept. So let's present you Mrs. Wam. She is originally from Bangkok, but she's living in Mexico. And she's married with a very nice and sympathetic husband who were born in Marseille. And during summertime, they come back in Marseille. And she came and she wanted me, to give a kind of advice regarding the destruction that she start to feel more and more. She just sees that everything is healthy, but the proportion start to be affected, the appearance is affected, and she would like to make something, but she doesn't know exactly what to do. So basically, this is the frame for the first consultation. And as you can see here, we have already a severe erosion because mainly when you have this palatal destruction, abrasion is able to destroy the incisal edge, but the palatal enamel is not affected as it is now. So, of course, it's a mix of erosion and abrasion, but you can see in anterior, in posterior, that some are more affected than others. It's not a problem, but this is just what you need to understand. And this is, as you can see, with erosion, you can face some very uncommon cavity. And with the power of the muscle and the abrasion and the function, when the erosion starts to increase, after you have a reduction of the mechanical stiffness of the tooth structure, and that's why it starts to create some crack and fracture sometime as well. So again, if you look at all, the mouth, you can see that she's already affected by a severe wear process. So the main question is, as a dentist, what do I want? What is my vision of the future for this case? And it has to fit, of course, with the vision of the patient. So basically, this is what you need to keep in mind. Don't go in detail to say, now I want to make veneers or palatal veneers or crown or I don't know what. I think that this is not the topic and the good timing to mention the tool that you need to use. At this step, what you need is which architecture are you looking for? And when you think as an architect as a step number one, this means that your main focus is about the wide corridor that you are looking for. Which type of wide corridor do you want to create? Which type of wide corridor you want to place in the space? Because sometimes, as you can see, it's very easy to place the ideal proportion. But what is not easy is to place it in the right position in the 3D space. So for example, from this case, extreme case, it's easy to find the proportion. But the main question is, do I have to place it from the pink part only? Do I have to place it from the white part only? Or is it a matter of both sides? And if you want me to be honest with you, and I think that this is what we try to do every day, the key point for the dentist is to have this vision. If you want to be a good dentist, you need to have the good vision. So it's not about finding the proportion. It's about, this is mathematics. You have the width, you can make the calculation of the length with the gold number. And then you will have an average which works in most part of the case. But the key part is, what is your perception of the patient at a social distance when they smile? Do you want to modify the incisional edge? Yes, not. Do you have a good smile line? Yes, not. Look at the profile. How is the lateral corridor? Do I need to widen it? Do I need to shorten it? Do I need to lengthen it? What is the relationship with the lip? This is why we are making picture. This is why the technician need also to make picture. And all of this synthesis, analysis is a key part, because after that, it's about making the shape in the ideal position. But when you know exactly where you want to place it, then you become the king. So at the end of the day, the key question is, on one side, I don't want to touch, or almost to be as minimal as possible in terms of invasivity. And on the other side, because of the destruction, I am looking for new morphology. I want a kind of step back to find again the morphology which existed, which has been existed the last 20 years. And it's because of this morphology that you can have the stability of the bite, that you can get the guidance, and this is why the patient is allowed to smile with a nice proportion, to be guided by the anatomy. That's the role of the anatomy. So basically, what I want from you as a step number one is, please make a list of from the dental schema where you need to reconstruct because of your observation. So tooth number 11, how is it in the facial part? How is the incisional edge? How is the palatal anatomy? Where I would love to modify this. And then you will have to mention it to the lab in order to let them know exactly what you are looking for. And that's, I think, probably the crucial point, to make your analysis and then to make the observation. So on one side, you have what you can see, what you can read inside the mouth. And on the other side, you have the social distance appearance, where you need to look at the patient and understand what your eye is, focusing, where is focusing. Do I like it or not? So from that, you want to create some proportion. And this proportion, and this is probably one of the most incredible revolution in dentistry over the last 20 years, we call it the mock-up. The mock-up and this completely new generation of composite, which are syringable, where we were able, just to fill the silicone index and to place it in the mouth and just to let 2 minutes wait, and we remove the excess, and the patient are able, without anesthesia, to visualize already the final outcome with, at the same time, the final function. And I think that it's really a fantastic tool, a powerful tool, first to confirm and validate your treatment planning, and second, to create emotion to the patient in order, just to let her be much more confident for all the upcoming clinical step. And that's why, at the end of the day, going back to the theory, it's important to understand that most part of the article today agreed on one fact. If you want to make the balance between biology and reconstruct new volume, then you have two options. Option one is you don't touch the bite and the vertical dimension. So this means that to reconstruct the new volume, you have to destroy the existing or the initial situation to keep or to create space, room, volume for the technician. And it doesn't make sense today. and it doesn't fit with the biological reality and requirement, as I told you. Option 2, which is what you can see here, is to play with the vertical dimension. So artificially, you will increase the byte and you will create the room for the space with almost no prep, because the space that you need to reconstruct is coming from the modification of the byte instead of the reduction of the tooth. And that's the biggest change, because you need to understand that when we say we have to raise the vertical dimension, most part of the time, it's mainly for biological reason. Because in that case, if you look at the patient, nobody can notice that she has a modification of the vertical dimension. Nobody is able to see that the lower floor of this patient is not good. Because it is. It's good. It's not good. So in order to understand why, even if she lost some tooth structure, the vertical dimension has not been affected, it's because of the aggression of the alveolar process during the wear process. So on one side, you destroy the volume. On the other side, the alveolar process is making an aggression from the bone. So that's why the vertical dimension is maintained. So at the end of the day, as I told you, just to make the idea clear, if we increase the vertical dimension, it is just for biological cost, not for aesthetic reason or facial appearance. And that's why, of course, you have some indication to play with the vertical dimension, and there is some non-indication, like the hypodivergent people, for example, when you have very long face already. Of course, it's not recommended to continue to increase it. But this is, let's say, on the side, and we will maybe discuss this later on. So when you look now at the methodology, you have different types, but all agreed on the main fact that we raise the vertical dimension in order to preserve more tooth structure. So one of the first school proposed, keeping in the prep philosophy, proposed to make monolithic crown, where they will be able to make crown prep, but inside enamel almost, because of the fact that they increase the vertical dimension. So it was proposed by the fantastic Mauro Fradiani, and with all of this team. Unfortunately, Giancarlo Barducci passed away, and I want just to say hello to his spirit and to thank him to his contribution in the dental technician world and dentistry in general, because this guy was a diamond, and unfortunately, he didn't resist to COVID, but it was a Superman, and we are all missing him. So it was just to say a small thought to him. So this was the first approach proposed by Fradiani. Then a second approach coming from Geneva, from the fantastic Francesca Vailati. And Francesca proposed at the end of the notice, with the 3-step technique, what she has called the sandwich approach. Sandwich approach means that instead of, cutting 360 degree for a crown, it's better to make one palatal veneers and one buccal veneers, and this means that you have even less to touch, almost nothing to touch. It's a really prepless. And with that, she proposed a complete step, but which needs a couple of clinical steps, like nine big appointment of 3 hours. And at the end, it was a bit of mix between direct composite and indirect restoration. So the technique was just amazing, and it was a huge plus in the dental community. Let's say the disadvantages from my point of view as a teacher was easy access for this technique. So that's why we came with this third way, let's say, which is what we have called the full mock-up technique. So the full mock-up technique was completely imported from the Galip-Gürel technique for the laminate veneers. Why? Because it was something very simple, to visualize the future and using this mock-up as a guide for your prep. And we publish, of course, a lot on this topic, because to have an idea, it's something, making one case is something else, and then making a methodology and a complete concept is even more complicated. And it took us almost 10 years, to be able to have this paper accepted in the one of the best journal in the world. It was the periodontal and restorative dentistry from Quintessence, and that's what we published already 3 years ago. And the key point that you need to understand is, first, thanks to the 3D printed template, we are able, to place this full mock-up in the mouth. Then we validate the bite and the aesthetic outcome, and we will use, this mock-up, especially in posterior, because that's the new things. We will use it as a guide for making the groove with a special thickness, in order to later on be able to place the occlusal veneers, called also tabletop, and make this restoration very predictable and standardized, because this is what we are looking for. And once you remove, this mock-up, you just have to finalize and making a very soft prep on top, on top of the occlusal anatomy, just to let the margin be visible for the impression, and more important, be readable by the technician while you will make the restoration. So basically, this is the DNA of the full mock-up concept. So we have different clinical steps that we can share with you. Step one is, let's say, the collecting of the data. So you need, after analyzing the case, you need to, make a picture, making impression. Then you send everything to the technician in order to produce the wax-up, analogic or digital, up to you, and then he will send it back to you, and you will be able to place this full mock-up in the mouth. Once the full mock-up is validated, then you can treat only the upper arch first, in order to avoid issue with the bite registration. And once the upper is finished, then you will treat the lower. Of course, to make the upper, you will use as an antagonist the lower mock-up already validated. And when you will take care of the lower part, of course, you will use the final upper arch already bonded. So basically, that's the flow. So going back in detail, you can see that, as I told you, we need picture, smile, then with magnification and intraoral picture, then different model. Very important will be, and of course, I have to solicitate you as a dentist to reduce the possibility of mistake or misunderstanding with the lab. The best things you have to do is to play with the composite in your hand, and just to lengthen it for the two central or the two central and the two lateral, even with a flow composite, in order, just to visualize at social distance if the smile line of the patient is almost correct. But it's not finished. You will have to record with this beautiful device proposed by my friend Patrice Margossian in Marseille. And this is Ditramax. So with that, you are able, to record the face references that you need to reconstruct a complete smile. You mean the interpupillary line as horizontal references, and the medium axis as the vertical references, and also the camper plane as the sagittal references. So with that, you can record it. When everything is screwed, then you just have to ask the patient to open the mouth and just to remove the device without unscrewing, which is basically the main cause of error. And same for the palatal. You need to use some composite, simple, just to visualize how it look like. And then when you see that the proportion looks okay, so the more it is destroyed, the more you need to add. It's a matter of common sense. And then you will just make a spot of light curing, and you will guide in centric relation your patient to check if you have a good symmetry. So when you recreate the palatal anatomy as we are doing now, then you have to check in posterior what happened in the space. Do I have or not enough space to reconstruct my need? And this is why the initial analysis where you mention tooth by tooth where you need to reconstruct will be a kind of synthesis of this observation. And it's very crucial because that's the initial point. And if you build well, it's very fast. If you don't build in the correct way, then you will have some big issue at the end. So going back to this, let's say, handmade small reconstruction that the dentist has to make by himself. Let's say that the main spirit of this is that you have to make with composites the volume that you would like to see with the final outcome. So for the palatal, you had some composite increment. Same for the incisal edge. In that case, for example, we want to reconstruct both arch. So this means that I have to lengthen a little bit the incisal edge of the anterior for cosmetic purpose. I need to improve the palatal anatomy of the central incisor for functional purpose and to recreate the anatomy. But moreover, because I have to reconstruct both arch, I need also to make composite in the lower arch just to simulate a little bit the future proportion that I'm looking for. And from that, when you will guide the patient, it takes 2 minutes to do this. I'm not looking for a fantastic composite, as you can see. I'm just looking for stabilization. So sometimes you can place 2 increments on the 2 central, and if needed, because the patient is a little bit parafunctional, as it is in many cases, you can also add on the canine if needed. And from that, we are just following what was proposed by Plusfeld already a year ago, where she said teeth are rebuilt with direct freehand according to their original anatomy. So what is the aim of what I'm showing with you now, what I am sharing with you, is just to go back to the nature that you want. So the key point is about the vertical dimension. When I was student, every time at the university we were mentioning the vertical dimension, we thought that you need to come from another planet to be able to take care of that. And I think that it was a big mistake from our teacher to let us present it in a very complex way. Because at the end, my experience is that it's much more about science and common sense. And common sense not has to be on the side. It's crucial to use the common sense if you want people to follow you. Otherwise, you want to keep just the position to explain something that nobody can understand. So the first statement is that playing with the vertical dimension is not at all dangerous. It doesn't mean that you have to do wrong things. I'm just telling you that you can play with the vertical dimension. It's a fantastic tool to solve most part of this clinical issue. But on the other side, you need to have a frame of security. So for example, here, when we play with all these composite increments, after we place the patient in centric relation, and then you need to lock the bite because you already check that the space created in posterior will be enough for reconstructing occlusal anatomy for my lower arch, occlusal anatomy for my upper arch. That's all the thing that you have to check. But when you want to record it, then it's important to use this beautiful material coming from our colleague from DMG, which is Luxabite. Because, in the past, I was playing with a lot of silicon, byte registration with silicon. And the main issue is with silicon, you have pumping effect when you want to place with the two models, one on top of the other. And if you press a lot, you don't have the same byte that if you just place like this. But with that kind of material, which is a resin material, a resin-based material, when you need to inject just a few inside the arch and ask the patient just to bite following, the stops that you have created with your direct composite. And then after 2-3 minutes, when it's the setting time is done, then you just ask your patient to open it. And sometimes a small composite is also living with this, which is not a big deal. But then you have a huge accuracy to place the model exactly as it should be. Today, you have also, because we are in the digital era, you have also the possibility with this fantastic device made from a French colleague. He created this company Mojo. So you are able to record, all the movements, the envelope of movement. And then you can know exactly what are the physiological envelope of the patient. And then when you will open the bite, you can open it with the system and you will create the space that you want. And the reconstruction that you will implement inside will have to follow this envelope in order not to make a lot of correction later on. So that's the beauty, let's say, of the artificial intelligence and all the digital tools that you have today. So when you think about the strategy of playing with the vertical dimension, you need to have a clear vision. Let's say we will split in two parts, anterior part and posterior part. For the anterior part, the key point is you have different options. Option one, you just want to treat one arch. So the palatal anatomy has been affected. And when we say we raise the vertical dimension by 2 millimeters, this means that the thickness of my palatal veneers will be 2 millimeters. Then you can have people like that you can face with bruxism. And then they have a beautiful palatal anatomy, but not anymore incisal edge. And on the other side, you need to treat also the lower arch. So when we will say we raise the vertical dimension in anterior by 2 millimeters, this 2 millimeters will be the lengthening of the lower incisal edge. And in many cases, when you have to treat both arch, you will have to split this 2 millimeters in a little bit for the up and a little bit for my incisal edge. So basically, this is how you need to think simple, just to have a clear vision. And in posterior, it's the same. When we say we treat only the upper arch, you need to pay attention, because if the initial smile line is correct and you need to add 1 millimeter on top of the existing cusp, then you will lower the smile line. And the main question will be, is it acceptable, or does it modify my smile line significantly and then reduce the aesthetic outcome? So after all of this discussion, then the technician is able, to produce the wax up. And of course, the full mock-up can be proceed with using silicon index or 3D printed template in order, to have something very precise and that you can place in the mouth. So the beauty is that in 2 minutes, you can see directly the final outcome in all the case. How can we proceed to make this printed technology inside? You just have to digitalize your wax up, so you can scan your wax up, and from that you will have on Exocad or on 3Shape software, on whatever you want, you will be able, to have this possibility to make, let's say, a template on top of that. So once this is already set, then you will ask the printer to print this, and inside we reline it, because the technician will reline in order to have a huge friction. So in another word, you will have something soft able to ensure the friction during the insertion, so no pumping effect. And on the other side, we have a very hard shell able to avoid distortion. So basically, this is what you can see just after placing this. Okay, we have a very small correction in the anterior, but it's almost the only thing that we have to correct. And then you gain a huge time just to validate your clinical approach. So once this outcome is validated and the patient is happy with that, then it's time to prep. So prep, you have to take care of two main topics as a clinician. One will be, okay, I'm faced to my final outcome. So my only issue now is to reduce or to create the thickness just required for the production of my restoration. And then you will have the guided concept, which was proposed by Galip already 20 years ago in his book. And with the depth cutter, you need also to do the same for the posterior. So initial situation on the left side, in the middle, because we have no more enamel on the occlusal anatomy, or almost no more enamel, we need to raise the vertical dimension to create a space to place the new anatomy that we are looking for. And then we will cut through this new anatomy. That's why when you cut from the future, in most part of the case, you don't touch the initial structure. So it's what we call additive dentistry. And for the last step is just to replace this mock-up by the final restoration. So what we have proposed as a methodology is to make some groove through the posterior mock-up. These grooves are made by a round burr, and the shaft is used as a bi-stop. So we are making 0.5 grooves thickness in the three parts of the occlusal anatomy. The two lateral grooves are just placing 1 millimeter below the summit of the cusp, and the one in the middle is placing from the central fossa from mesial to distal. So at the end, we are completely in a guided concept in anterior and in posterior as well. And as you can see here, we are able, to make it in a very standardized way. And I don't think that this is a matter of, let's say, skill. It's just a matter of being guided. You have the tool, you control, and you cut through. So most of the people are able to copy that. And I think that that's the power of the methodology. And when you finish the topic of how deep has to be your cut, then you need to enter in a second topic, which is which design I need to provide for my technician and to ensure a good stabilization of my restoration. And again, in anterior, there is nothing new, except that for the palatal veneers, we just make one spot to stabilize my future palatal veneers. And for the anterior, it's still the same. But for the posterior part, then we want to move from the previous concept of the overlay where you had to destroy the proximal ridge, and in order to create a space of 1.5 millimeter thickness to preserve the ridge, to what we call now the carpaccio, where we keep the marginal ridge and we just place on top of the occlusal anatomy our occlusal veneer, so there will be only compression, axial loading for this restoration. So in terms of design, we have different types. It depends if your occlusal veneers has to be inside the cusp, has to be beyond the cusp, but also preserving at the same time the smile line, because the buccal cusp are already very good in terms of smile harmony. Or you have also to recreate simultaneously both facial and occlusal anatomy with what Pascal Magne has called Vignerlet. So, as you can see here, the prep are not complicated. We just want with a round burr, to make all the margin on top of the occlusal anatomy. We have almost nothing to prep. In many cases, we needn't anesthesia. And for the premolar, sometimes if the buccal cusp are already a little bit flat, we try to keep as much as possible the all-in-one restoration, where we are making at the same time the occlusal anatomy and the buccal anatomy. Sometimes we make a sandwich, but let's say it's more complicated for the technician and for the dentist. Once we finalize the posterior prep, we keep, of course, the anterior mock-up to keep the vertical dimension, and we just lock the bite, as you can see on this picture, with the Luxabite in order just to be sure that now in posterior it's locked. And once you have these two pieces of Luxabite, you remove it from the mouth, and after you will be able to start the prep of the anterior. But when you will have to record the bite, you will have just to place again these two stop or posterior stop made with Luxabite, and you will continue to make the connection between these two pieces with the entire injection of Luxabite. So one of the questions that I assume you would like to ask about this 0.5, why you keep this 0.5 number, as we are also using it for the anterior buccal veneers? If you look at the literature, you can see on this very nice study where they make a lot of micro scan of the natural dentition, and they it just appears that when you remove 0.5 enamel reduction in the proximal and the buccal area, you don't expose dentin. And this is very interesting because this is what we want, to keep as much as possible dentin. Then, when you look at this study from Petragues about the fracture resistance regarding some premolar and special and complex design of occlusal restoration, you can see that the fracture resistance is better for very thin or ultra thin restoration than for thick restoration. So it was a first interesting approach which come in the same way. And then with this article from Pascal Magne, already a couple of years, he also showed that all of these ultra thin occlusal veneers are also a very good approach for preserving the initial structure on one side, but also protecting and raising the vertical dimension with this simple tool. And because I am a scientist and I need always to be, let's say, honest with all of you, when you like something, you need also to take care of the article which doesn't go in the same direction. And you have also this very nice study where they say a little bit the opposite of what I am claiming now. So let's say that this article shows that the thicker is the restoration, the more resistant it will be. But as, let's say, a weak part of this study, they have been using for the luting cement a self-etching system. And I think that, not I think, but with that, you don't have the same bond strength. And all of this very innovative dentistry is based on the power of the bonding. And if you don't use the best ingredient to bond with the highest value, of course, you go back to the pure mechanical strategy where the thicker is the more resistant for sure. And this is probably one of the weak parts of this study. This is not interesting. So we made just a study with one of my students regarding the fracture resistant test. And we compare overlay 1.5 with tabletop, and we compare also two types of restoration. One was made with hybrid block, and the second one with Emax press. So we didn't notice statistical differences between tabletop of 0.5, where we preserve the marginal ridge, and 1.5 overlay, where we destroy the marginal ridge. So what I want to tell you in terms of fracture resistance is, why do you want me to destroy the marginal ridge if I can get the same mechanical efficiency keeping them? So this is one of the bases, of our concept. So once all of this is made, the patient can leave the office, with this temporary. And after, it's a matter of lab technology, material, how to produce it. And one of the questions with this new type of, let's say, occlusal restoration was, do we need to continue to layer the material? Of course not. Today, it's not anymore relevant to think about layering composite or ceramic in the posterior area. Today, we have fantastic material in monolithic way. Can come from analogic if this is press, it can come from digital if this is block. In both of the case, we are speaking about press and stain or mill and stain. So what is important is also in this complex environment with erosion, you need to be aware in your criteria of selection about the profile of the patient. Of course, you have a lot of advocates and lawyers for always composite, because it's smooth, you can repair, it's very gentle, and so on. And I fully agree with that. And my purpose is not to fight. And I agree. The other side is also to be honest, because in most parts, 70% of my patients that I treat with erosion are young girls affected by anorexia and bulimia. And this means that you have a huge acidity in the mouth. And you need to know that the resin matrix of this material is strongly and severely affected by this acidity. So it is just a case. I've been treated like 12 years ago. So at that time, it was the beginning. I follow the requirement. So palatal veneers were made, with composite and lab composite, simple. And you can see 10 years later, because this patient with anorexia bulimia, of course, she's better, but she still keeps this acidity because the food regime is not modified significantly. It was improved, but it was not a revolution. So this means that you need also to take into account that the type and profile of patient is able also to modify your criteria or selection of material. Also, you can go with a block of composites, as you can see here with Luxacam composite, one of the latest material. One of the advantages of this is it's easy and you can mill. And when you mill composite, the machine can mill at 0.5 without big headache. But you can't mill ceramic block like Emax, for example, at 0.5 because of the vibration. You will need 5 blocks to be able to mill one restoration, so it's not relevant and not efficient. Then you have the hybrid block made with ceramic and composite. You have a couple on the market already, very promising also, with a good stability. Because mechanically speaking, we can visualize that it works well, and still you are able, to mill very thin, because it's majority of composite and other filling inside. And then you have the lithium disilicate in analogic or in digital. We experience all the material and we make a lot of full art with all the restoration. And I have to say that we were almost happy with most part of the material. We just noticed with composite that we have a little bit more chipping, especially for that kind of tabletop or occlusal veneers when it is made with composite or hybrid block than when it's made with lithium disilicate. But even with lithium disilicate, just a stain, monolithic, and you can get something very pleasant. So for this patient, this is what we did. And as you can see here, what we like, with this syringable material used for the temporary. So today on our table, when we play, we have two types of materials that we like to play with. One is a pure bisacryl material named Luxatemp. This is our gold standard since more than almost 20 years. And with that, you can play. You can see that after 1 month, the stability is still good, and the patient can have a very nice social life during all of this period. And it's very easy to remove. Sometimes, if you are looking for a long-term temporary because the patient is traveling and you are afraid that they will break it after 1 month, then you have the same type of material, but little bit more, not little bit, significantly more resistant as a Luxacron. And then you have something very solid that you can keep for, 5-6 months, because we are also using this material for all the immediate loading with implants. So you can see that it's very solid. So when we go for the cementation, we need first to test and to try. So we try aesthetically, we try the stability, and then we want to make a simultaneous bonding protocol for both parts, palatally and buccally. But of course, you need to follow the sequences of the production in the lab. So if, for example, your technician produced first the palatal veneers, and then on top of that, they created the buccal veneers, you need to bond first the palatal veneers and to place on top of that, of course, without polymerization, you need to place at the same time on top of that the buccal veneers. So it depends, but if this is the opposite, you need to follow the opposite. So at the end, you can see here that we reconstruct the volume thanks to the rise of vertical dimension. We will have a new palatal anatomy, and in the posterior area, it is still the same. So we need, of course, we will have to, when we have all one pieces for the premolar, we are using the individual dam in Marseille because this is our favorite protocol. Again, not because we think that making a rubber dam for 10 or 12 restoration at the same time is not good, as you can see on the social media and also by our talented colleague. I just say that the starting point is most part of the people are not using a rubber dam. So my aim is to let people play with the rubber dam. And the let's say, the easy access of the single individual dam is just incomparable with the other, where you have to use Teflon and I don't know how many clamp, and it takes already 20 minutes to place all the champ like this. And it's not easy. And what is for us really important is to make the life easy, and at the same time not letting the quality dropping down. So we bond one by one, and you can achieve, this very nice integration in upper. When upper is finished, then you have to treat lower. Still the same, we place the mock-up in the lower arch, we check the bite, and when we see that it's okay, then we cut through the mock-up and we control everything, same in the anterior area. So, the protocol is very well standardized. The prep are very simple, just make a round prep on top of the occlusal anatomy. After, it's a matter of where do I need to reconstruct. Look at this picture of the bonding protocol. The initial situation, you can see that the cusps are already flat. So this means that I know that my future restoration will have to reconstruct the cusp that I have lost. So for that, this means that I need continuity between the fascial initial anatomy and my future restoration, because I want to reconstruct the cusp. So that's why my prep will finish at the end of the occlusal anatomy, in order to let my technician to make a very good transition between what I had and what exists just before. So it's a matter of common sense. I just want you to follow the marginal ridge, and when you arrive in lingual or buccal, think about, do I need to reconstruct the cusp, yes or not? If you have to reconstruct the cusp, you go beyond the summit of the cusp. If you don't have to reconstruct the cusp, you need to stay 1 millimeter below the summit of the cusp. So just a small movie, where you can see the protocol here with high magnification, and then we etch. We always use a pure light cure resin cement. So you have many on the market. But from our colleague from DMG, the Vitic, where you have a very nice choice of color, of course, and you have also a nice drying paste, so you can play with that. It's very efficient. And from this, you have to inject, the resin cement. Then you place it here. It's very thin, so you had a very small hole in the middle of the occlusal anatomy, but it's not important as long as it is very well bound. Then it's very important to maintain the pressure and not to remove the excess in order to let the margin be full of composite and not with empty space or empty gap, because it's not good. In the anterior, in the lower, it was different. We lost the height, so we wanted to make veneers, but at the same time, on the initial analysis, we also, it was mentioned that we lost the lingual enamel. So that's why we went for a peripheral monolithic crown in order, to keep the vitality perfect, but at the same time to reconstruct everything as we wanted. So you can see that at the end, using this bonding protocol is very standardized. This is what we love to use it. You can see that playing with a fantastic technician is able to allow me to make this very nice restoration, full arch. You can see that this new palatal anatomy is able, to stabilize and change completely, the function of the patient. And same for the lower arch, as you can see here. And that's, the final picture of both smile, both arch. And of course, the patient, she feels very good. And like if it is his own teeth, which is the case, because for the patient, when they ask me to explain, but what you would do on my existing teeth, I just reply by the following sentences. I will bond your loss of enamel with an artificial enamel made with ceramic, basically. And they understand this. It's important to highlight this topic of skin. It is like a second skin. So you recreate the skin that was lost just before. So basically, here was on the left side, the initial situation. You can see the final situation. Why we wanted to present today with our colleague the full mock-up, because we believe that this is an easy access way to treat the wound dentition. We work deeply on this topic the last 12 years. We publish a lot. We made a lot of cases. We face some issue in order to be able today, to propose you something able to work in all the cases. And at the end, this is, I think, the spirit of this exchange. You will find all of this detail and philosophy in the books that we have that I have written already in 2019, that you can find already on online shop. It's quintessence.kubi.com. You click on it and you can directly order the book. You have already the English version, the French version, the German version. We will have the 14 language version, I guess. So feel free if you are interested, and you will have a lot of video with augmented reality inside the book with your smartphone. You just need to download the app, which is free, of course. And the new things that we will launch this month, will be the box. Because of the confinement and the pandemic, we understood that there is still need for education. And for people who are not able to travel in France or in Marseille, we want to let them, to give them the possibility to follow courses with a very premium box where you have everything inside. You will have 10 or 15 hours courses, a tutorial, and also a live demo in order, to give you exactly the taste of what we are doing in our training center in case you can't come for pandemia purpose. So this is the different things that we have already launched, and you can see. If you have the chance to be able to come in Marseille, I will be more than happy to receive you. And that's our website, and you can go if you want and register. If you are English, you can just need to be a group of English or other language. It's not a problem. And at the end, to summarize a little bit the spirit of what we wanted to do today, of what we were able to elaborate with our colleague from DMG, with the Stile Italiano community, with the people from Interdental, is that to follow, the spirit of this African proverb, which I think represent perfectly our mindset. If you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, it's better to be together. So thank you very much for everything. And now I think it will be the question and answer time, probably. Thank you, and see you soon, I hope. Yep. So
yeah, Stefan, thank you so much for this very interesting presentation, but I would not even name it presentation because it was really like a almost clinical training and a guidance through some problems that we're going to face sooner or later in our professional career. So thank you for sharing your experience and your knowledge with us. And I'm very sure that everybody was enjoying this a lot. And we have some questions here.
Yeah.
That we would like to hear your opinion about it. And the first one is, if you wait some days before you consider the final restoration to mock-up.
Yeah. So first of all, when you rise a vertical dimension, I didn't have time to make a complete courses about this topic, but just to make the picture clear for our friend. There is two options. When you rise the vertical dimension, is do we rise beyond 5 millimeter, or do we rise the vertical dimension below 5 millimeter? So if this is below 5 millimeter, we don't wait a testing period as our colleague is suggesting. If you are beyond 5 millimeter, because the change is significant, then you need to let the patient wait and adapt to this new vertical dimension, new bite, and so on. And because it's logical, when you rise for more than 5 millimeter, this means that you have a severe destruction, so your mock-up is much more stable in the mouth, so you can keep it for a couple of times, 1 week, 2 weeks, until the complete clinical silence.